Thank you. We now begin our first session, a panel discussion on climate change and migration, followed by the launch of the much-awaited reporting guide that we have produced over the past few months. Our panelists are Jagdish Krishnaswamy, Dean of IIHS School of Environment and Sustainability. Jagdish is an eco-hydrologist by training, an expert in climate and ecosystem change. He has been a coordinating lead author for the IPCC and leads the IIHS Long-Term Urban Ecological Observatory in Bangalore. Kavita Iyer, she's an independent journalist and author focusing on rural distress and development. Kavita is the author of Landscapes of Loss, the Story of an Indian Drought, which charts the story of Marathwada and its people. Chandni Singh, lead IIHS practice and researcher on adaptation and climate justice. Chandni is an IPCC author since 2017 and leads the CLAPS project. And Ketki Goge, lead director's office at IIHS. Ketki has worked as a journalist for more than 2 decades, and at IIHS, she works on climate finance, urban governance, and public finance. Over to you, Ketki.
Thank you, Sophie. Before we start off, I just want to say I'm really happy to see so many journalists and comms professionals here at IIHS today. I feel like my tribe is in the room. So really, a very warm welcome to all of you. I thought we can start this panel discussion with a couple of opening questions for each one of our panelists. And you guys can take 10 to 15 minutes to answer those questions. And then we can move into a more organic discussion. And we can keep around 15 minutes in the end for all of you to ask questions or share your insights. So to begin, I will start with Jagdish. So Jagdish, for most of us Indians, and definitely all of us in the room, climate change is a lived reality. We've seen recurring droughts, recurring floods, landslides, and now increasing heat waves. And yet, these are only the first order impacts of climate change. And they don't really help us sort of put together this entire picture of how the world is shifting. So can you help us unpack some of the second order impacts of climate change and how do they interact with ecosystems, human systems, and climate systems? And why is that relevant when we talk about internal migration?
Yeah, this is working. So very happy to be amongst a tribe that I respect a lot. I want to point out that Chandni was mentioning about how the journals are gated. I would say that the information in many of those journal articles are also gated, not accessible to many people. And I think that your tribe plays a fantastic role in making it accessible to all, everybody who needs to know about it. So I want to start with that. Ketki, I wonder how many of you may have seen the Deccan Herald this morning. And there was a very nice article, very alarming as well, on how because of changes in humidity, temperature, and also because of rainfall, we actually have a lot more infectious diseases during certain times of the year, or more often in certain years. And as a result, the use of antibiotics and other is actually then causing sort of cascading impacts on overall health of people. So that leads to developing of antimicrobial resistance. And so that's one example of how we need to connect these various sectors in terms of certain practices that so in some sense, new advisories and new types of ways of adapting to this will have to be demonstrated in large sectors. So that's just one example. The other is that just to point out, because I'm also have a lot of interest in ecology and conservation, just to point out that we often see the term nature-based solutions, ecosystem-based adaptation. And you will also see in many reports, whether it's in the state action plans, which are sometimes very well done, but the reference to blue and green infrastructure is as if they are static entities. Now, these nature-based solutions or blue and green infrastructure actually have lots of organisms that contribute to their functioning. So, the climate change is actually impacting those as well. Or other types of land use change interacting with climate change is also going to be impacting. So, so I just want to point out that it's not just people who move. There are millions of birds, bees, bats, butterflies, and even elephants and other larger animals that need to move from one place to another. And I mean, all of us have grown up learning about migratory birds. The State of India's Birds Report, which was released earlier, some of you may have seen it, has brought to our attention that, that the flyways which connect the migratory places in Central Asia, Europe, and Africa to the places where these birds come, to the wintering grounds in India, are also under threat. And so, also if you look at the nature-based solutions that we have in and around cities and elsewhere, they also depend on, for example, pollinators, they may depend on pest control agents, all of which, that biodiversity, native biodiversity, also is going to be impacted by climate change and other types of changes. So we need to look at nature-based solutions and in terms of what makes them tick. So that's one aspect. The other is that it's not just cities which are being, and villages, and the terrible and tragic event that happened in Uttarakhand reminds us that there are some places where the geology is simply fragile and it's not going to be able to cope with the type of rainfall events that are happening in recent decades. They go beyond the capacity of even, natural systems. So I want to give an example from Upper Nilgiris, where we have a long-term site. We got about 920 mm of rainfall in a day. Now that can overwhelm any natural system as well. And there were landslides there. I just want to mention that the landslide in Wayanad, which caused terrible damage and loss of life, it emerged in a forested hillside. Even though the land use downstream was, and the settlements were of course very vulnerable, but the emergence of the hazard itself can happen in any type of ecosystem. So yes, ecosystems do have the ability to absorb and even buffer us from the impacts of certain types of climatic shocks, but they themselves are vulnerable. And I think this is something that is perhaps not as well understood as we should be. And also bringing to other aspect, getting back to human health, we know, for example, the Nipah virus, that comes from, it's a zoonotic disease. And so we need to keep track of human-nature interactions, which may cause enhancement of the exposure to zoonotic diseases. So bats are known to shed more viruses when they are under stress of various kinds. It could be heat stress, it could be stress from loss of habitat, and so on. And so Chandni mentioned planetary health. So when we have to bring down planetary health to its components, I think that keeping human-nature relationships over space and time, we really need to relook at that. Because in the coming decades, we are going to have a lot of problems. The ecological assets that we are relying on to provide us protection from climate change, they themselves will be under a lot of stress. So these are just a couple of things that I thought that may add a little bit of context to some of the discussions that are happening. I think we also need to realize that some parts of India are going to become unlivable for at least some parts of the year. So when we think about pilgrimage, tourism in certain seasons in certain parts of the country, whether it's in the Himalayas or elsewhere, we may have to adapt to what is happening. It's going to happen every year or every other year, and it's going to kill a lot of people. It's going to destroy a lot of infrastructure, homestays, hotels, which are built on riversides. Maybe those places aren't going to be habitable in the current form. So you may need to have some very nimble type of infrastructure which you can dismantle during the monsoon and move people out of harm's way, and then the people come back. So you're making migration, local, regional migration safer, and also tourism, which is a big source of income for many people in many parts of the country. I think that also needs to now adapt to the challenges from climate change. So I think I'm just going to end here. And
so, Jagdish, what you spoke about in terms of fragile ecosystems and its impacts reminded me of a story that Preeti you did on how climate change was impacting red ants, I think, in central, all insects in central India, and how that's impacted the Adivasi population living there, who are dependent on red ants. And climate change has led to, I think, red ants not being available on the ground, and they've moved up on the trees. So, when you really interrogate and examine, the interconnections are so deep, and I think that's what makes telling of this climate migration story so complex. Jagdish, one more question. What are some of the things that are surprising even to you as an environmental scientist when it comes to how climate change is fueling urban and rural disasters every year?
The surprising thing is not more on the scientific or biophysical side, which I think there is a lot of evidence and information and data. It's how we are responding to them. I mean, I have not seen any rethinking of some of the type of infrastructure that plans in the Western Himalaya, in Uttarakhand. 2013, we had the Kedarnath disaster, and we have had a series of terrible, horrible things happening. And yet, people don't seem to be shifting from certain types of infrastructure development, the way roads are being built, the way certain types of hydropower projects are being located. A lot of workers are being exposed to extreme hazards because they continue to work during the monsoon. Many of them have been washed away in some of these events. Pilgrims and tourists are being exposed. All the people who run these hotels and homestays and shops, which cater to tourists and pilgrims, they also sometimes regionally migrate, and they are also impacted. And so this is something is a bit of a surprise, because we can't pretend that we have not had enough of these. 2013 onwards, certainly we can't now pretend that this is not going to be a big problem. In cities, I think that even when smart cities were first defined, I think many of us probably noticed, and I think you would have been even more keen observer of this than scientists, that they did not have a comprehensive view of the type of challenges that urban spaces and urbanization as a process is facing and will face in the future, especially in relation to ecology, environment, climatic hazards, and the wellness of people as a whole. Even other things that can combine with stress. So apart from heat stress, we also have noise stress. A lot of people are exposed to a lot of noise and heat during the course of their living in a city, simply because of being on the streets or working under those conditions. And I don't know how much of the smart city idea and concepts took into account some of these dimensions of living safely in the city in the next few decades.
Yeah, not even the urban flooding, I think, has been addressed by most of our cities. Kavita, moving on to you. We know, and we've discussed this, that climate migration is a side story for the mainstream media. And even when it is done, it's framed very narrowly. So typically, journalists will enter this story when something happens as an event, cyclical droughts, then journalists will be set out to do the story. And because of that, there is a certain kind of narrative which gets built, which is about distress migration. And we know there are various reasons for this, including institutional reasons and the nature of media itself. But many journalists, including yourself, have approached this story very differently. You've explored many different ways, diverse ways of telling the story, and you've brought nuance and complexity to the issue. So what are some of the ways that journalists and communicators can enter this story, which sort of gives a more fuller picture of what's happening on the ground?
Thank you, Ketki. Ketki is an old friend of mine. We go back 25 years. She was the first person I met when I started my very first job, and she had just started her first job there a week earlier. So we go back to 2000. I actually want to take inspiration from Jagdish because he very gently made some very political points here. And I think that I've made some, I have some prepared notes on what I wanted to talk about today. But so inspired by Jagdish, I want to start by saying that the crisis in telling the stories of climate migration or any other kind of migration or any other kind of impact of the climate crisis is not different from and cannot be seen as separate from the larger crisis in journalism. And if we have to do better journalism in on climate issues, then we have to be able to do better journalism first of all. I think that is the bigger crisis. And it's easy, and this is not the room where I should be saying this because, of course, all of us, all friends and colleagues here, and everyone in this room very much understands, accepts that, and has been working very hard to do those stories in a way that they deserve to be done. However, for us to acknowledge as a group that there is a crisis outside of this room which stops us and themselves from doing better journalism overall on everything else, stopping us from being political, stopping advocacy groups from being political. I think that there is a fundamental problem there, and until that problem is actually resolved, there cannot be a wider movement among journalists to tell climate stories more effectively. Because ultimately, the climate crisis is just as political as every other problem that we come across as journalists. Having said that, also, when I set out to write a book about Marathwada, I did not plan it to be a book about the climate crisis. I purely felt that a newspaper was not the correct avenue for me to be able to tell longer stories about people who were experiencing something over a period of time. And I felt then that there was possibly a lot of the accounts that were falling into the margins of the newspaper and therefore needed to be told in a more direct form through a book. So really the book is just accounts of people, and I think that accounts of people experiencing climate crisis or any other kind of crisis, the accounts of people are really what make the story effective, memorable. We can spend a whole day discussing numbers, discussing impact. We will forget, but we will not forget how someone made us feel when they told us how they felt when something happened to them. And to be able to bring those experiences of people who are experiencing climate change right now is really the way I think to do the best journalism about climate migration. So actually, I feel that, Ketki, climate migrants are in the newspaper every day. It's just that we are not seeing them in the way we imagine that they would be seen. Of course, we need 101 Reporters is doing a year full of climate stories. There are people who are working purely on coastal salinity. Fantastic. Of course, we need all of those. But in fact, if you just do a Google search today for migrant worker Bombay or migrant worker Bangalore, yes, you'll find a lot of stories about the gig workers and the struggles that they're undergoing. But additionally, some of the stories that I came across when I did this Google search last evening, one story that came across was in Bombay, somewhere just on the outskirts of Bombay, a migrant worker was traveling to work, and his head was pierced by an iron rod that fell from a metro construction site. So the story was about really the fact that he's on the verge of death and he's in hospital, and he was conscious through this process when he was picked up with a rod in his brain, and it went in 2 or 3 inches deep, and he was conscious, and there's a photograph of him bleeding and sitting in an auto and being ferried to the hospital. Fantastic story. When I read a little further, it said that the man was working in Bhiwandi and he belongs to Pratapgarh in UP. And that is what I began to think about, that I really want to know what brought him to this point in life where he has to take a fairly difficult journey to go to work when he could have been farming his land or his father's land in Pratapgarh. These are really the kinds of the other kinds of stories that you will come across when you do the search for migrant worker Mumbai accident, migrant worker Bengaluru accident. You will find stories, multiple stories of Dalit workers who stepped into a sewer and they were cleaning a sewer and they were not experienced workers. They were doing it for the first time, and it doesn't tell you that the worker came from a place where there is extreme heat or extreme drought or cyclical flooding. It doesn't tell you that, but that really, those are the climate migrants who are already in our newspaper, and therefore this is something that I had a chat with you about. I think all of us as journalists will need to be able to cultivate a climate lens. It cannot be the job of the environment reporter or the climate reporter or the team that is doing a year of climate stories. It cannot be their job to tell these stories. All of these people are in our newspapers and in our headlines every day. It is just that we are not viewing their crises as climate-related crises. And that is a big, I think, a shortcoming at our end. One of the other stories that I came across was, in fact, 3 months ago or 4 months ago, in March of 2025, in Nagpada in Mumbai, a group of men, they entered a basement a water tank in a basement that had been lying vacant or abandoned for a few years, and it had collected a lot of sludge. And they went in, and exactly as it happens in sewers, they stepped in, and there were noxious fumes, and they were breathless. They went in without equipment, and they died. Read a little further. The whole story is about the fact that they died, and the fourth guy who went in was trying to rescue them, and he also died. But you read a little further, and there's one line in the story that says they came from Murshidabad, and that reminded me about a lot of the migrants who were on the train, the Coromandel Express train that went from the east all the way to the south. So that happened in 2023 in June. And a day or two after it happened, somebody happened to send me, or I was asking around. So I have friends who are working with migrant workers who are traveling long distances regularly. And through them, I managed to get a railway list of all the passengers on the train who were reserved passengers. I know that a lot of the passengers who died, almost 300 of them died in the Coromandel Express tragedy. You remember the one I'm talking about, the Balasore tragedy, where the Coromandel Express rammed into a stationary goods train. So someone gave me a list of a list of passengers and phone numbers for reserved tickets. Of course, those who died many of them may have been unreserved. Also, everyone who was there at the site and saw the number of dead bodies told me that the count is an extreme undercount of the dead bodies that are being given, because in fact there were 400, 500 unreserved passengers packed into every single bogie. Anyway, so I got this list, so I began to call. I made cold calls and said, I'm just curious to know, have you found your loved one? Are you safe? And so I was able to talk to about 20 different young men who either were on the train themselves or whose family member had been on the train. Some of them had lost some family, some of them had injuries. Very, very interesting accounts. One of them, the first story that I started my story with was about a gentleman from Purba Bardhaman on the east of West Bengal. And he told me that the General Dabba is a pipeline of young men traveling from eastern India to Tamil Nadu and Kerala for work, and many of them had actually lost farm incomes. And when I questioned further, he told me that he had lost his own house in a flood a few years previously, and he had taken a loan in order to rebuild a pakka house, and that 2 decades earlier his farmland had begun to flood. So they had had this experience of losing farm income for 2 decades. Not the dramatic, I'm having a drought here this year and we are an entire village that is packing up and moving to Mumbai to find work there. Not that kind of dramatic displacement, but something that they'd been experiencing over 20 years, and they'd been doing it slowly. Like 1 year, there's one family member who's going away to Kerala to work. The next year, that guy is taking his family members, that guy is taking his son, that guy is taking his brother. And so we tend to, as journalists, look for something that is dramatic, that is headline-worthy, that gives us that, that sexy headline that says 500 migrants from Nanded sitting in a park or an open ground in Mumbai, and someone's offering them food because they're hoping to find work here, because it's a terrible drought here in Marathwada this year. Those are the stories that do make it to the papers. These are the stories that somehow don't, but these are also extremely important climate stories of movement, of mobility, of being forced to move, and also of people having the choice. And Chandni spoke about agency, and these were people who told me very clearly that they could move to another part of the country to find work, but wages in Kerala are 1,200 rupees a day. Why would they not move to Kerala? So these are people who do have some agency. Some of them are skilled workers. Some of them are furniture workers who do carving. It so happened that in that same month, in June of 2023, there was an IIT report along with some other organizations, IIT and I think, I don't remember. There was an IIT report that said that some of these same districts, one of the other groups on that train that I spoke to was a group of students who nearly died. They were very young girls and they didn't want to talk to me at all. And I was trying, again, deeply political story there. Large numbers of students, young girls also from Simanchal, the part of Bihar that is Purnia, Kishanganj, etc. They go all the way from Bihar to Kerala to study, because schools in Kerala are offering, there may be schools, there may be madrasas, I have not investigated, but they're offering them free education, free boarding, better nutrition, better Arabic, better English, and the students want to go and the parents want to send them. The journey they take is that from Kishanganj, they will go to Shalimar in West Bengal. From Shalimar, they will take a train to Chennai, and from Chennai they will take a third train to Kerala in order to get to boarding school, and where they will spend the rest of the year in boarding school. Some of those students watched the accident. They were safe. They managed to get to safety soon enough. But the story I heard was that there is extreme poverty in Simanchal, and that's one of the reasons why the parents want to send their children to better opportunities elsewhere. This was a climate story that was just not captured, despite the fact that so much good journalism happened around the Coromandel Express. I desperately wanted to go and do that journey from Kishanganj to Shalimar, and from Shalimar to Chennai, and from Chennai to Kochi, but I didn't eventually manage to do it. Maybe someday I will. But that same month, in June 2023, IIT brought out a report saying that Simanchal is one of the most susceptible areas of the country for climate change. And it so happened that Kishanganj had some years of drought and some years of flood. Years of drought plus years of flood plus a few years of average farm income, it means that you are in socioeconomic distress. And these are stories that are not happening overnight. It's not that one fine day everybody in Kishanganj woke up and said, we'll send our children to school in Kerala. This is happening over a period of time. The guy who gave me all the information was someone who had done his MA from University of Calicut, a guy living in Kishanganj who had done his MA from University of Calicut 20 years ago. And so this was something that has been happening over a long period of time. What it takes from us is to be able to listen and hear, take notes carefully, and to connect those dots that they may not be able to connect. Nobody on the Coromandel Express told me that we migrate because of climate change. Nobody told me that they're climate affected. Not even one person told me on their own accord that we have lost farm incomes and that is why. This is all information that emerges from being prodded a little, poked a little, multiple calls, building trust, letting them know that you are not going to misuse the information. The group from Kishanganj that was going to the madrasa in Kerala, they were terrified of talking to me. I eventually did not use that account in my story at all. Because they think that there's going to be some horrible backlash for whichever group is funding the education of students from Bihar in a madrasa in Kerala. So purely, telling a great climate story ultimately is telling a great story. And therefore, being a good journalist is all we really need. And that requires us to go back to our very basics and to be able to do our first jobs right. That's what I want to say.
Kavita, do you want to talk a bit about gender? Because that's one of the things that is sort of invisibilized in climate migration, and your work and your writing does focus on that.
Sure. So one of the most interesting experiences that I've had, and I've said this actually to a lot of my friends, that there is no better way of seeing India. I'm blessed and most fortunate that I'm able to see India through the eyes and experiences and stories of rural Indians who are living these experiences that we are reading about, living these experiences that are in the data that Chandni spoke about. There is no better way to see India, and to be able to do it authentically only requires you to listen. A group of women from one of the, I think from either South Parganas or 24 North, one of those, they were in, I met them in Udaipur, where they were making these little earrings where you sew beads together with a thread, a plastic thread, and you make these earrings, and they were getting paid a few paisa per piece. And all of those are then packed together in these plastic bags. It's laborious work, and nobody else wants to do it, and they do it for a pittance. I mean, calling it a pittance is also being too generous. And they spend the entire day hunched over those things, trying to get the needles into those bead holes. They told me that they were not the migrant workers. They said that we are the housewives. And they didn't want me, when I said that I'm looking for workers, they said, no, we are not workers, we are just the housewives. It made no sense because there were so many of them, visibly large numbers of them. But they said that they had left 24 South, 24 North Parganas several years ago when their lands began to become salty because of salinization of their farmlands. They couldn't grow their paddy crop like they used to, so they began to seasonally move to Udaipur for work where their husbands were working as construction laborers. The women don't often see themselves as laborers at all, because they're doing everything, right? They're running the family, they're running the household, they're cooking, they're cleaning, they're collecting water, they're keeping the house functioning, and they're working. A lot of this work is also done from home. Gender happens to be this spot of invisibility that is not invisibilized by only us or by society at large, but by the women subjects themselves. They don't see themselves as victims. They don't see themselves as being the migrant worker. They tend to minimize their own experiences. This is a problem. There are so many women here that they understand exactly what I'm saying, that we tend to minimize our own experiences because we think that in the larger scheme of things, we're just doing what we need to do. It's very easy to miss the gender angle of climate stories because the women don't speak up as being the person affected. It takes, again, I'm very lucky because women talk to other women. It's actually women are in a, I fear that male journalists will never be able to get these stories done the way women can, because women, we can walk into their kitchens and chat with them while they're making chai and get those accounts that they're not talking to a journalist about. They're just telling a friend that, yeah, I've had menstrual troubles since I moved from my village to here, and I've never spoken about it to even my husband. So they're not talking to a journalist, they're talking to another woman. And that is one of the ways of being able to get those accounts. And thank you for asking this question, because I think that the problem with getting stories about women is that women are not telling those stories. Although they're deeply affected, they're just not talking about it. They think it's okay.
So I think it's about asking and listening deeply, which is what journalism is a lot about. Chandni, a lot of what Kavita was talking about, and you are nodding, nodding to, is these are the things that we found out we are finding out, and we know research tells us, and they really challenge mainstream narratives and sort of the public imagination about migration and migrants. So could you speak to that a bit? And also, when does migration become an adaptive strategy? Is it always an adaptive strategy? What are the limits to it? If you can also talk about that a bit.
Thanks. I was nodding along with Kavita now, but I've been nodding along with her book for a very long time, because I was like, oh, this is the book that I wanted to write, but you've written it so beautifully. And talking about climate change and the political economy of development, like how these two things come together in Marathwada. So that, I think, is it's a wonderful book, I think, Landscapes of Loss. All right. So first of all, I think on this idea of the narratives and how we're talking about climate change and migration, I guess I agree with what Jagdish and Kavita have been saying. And I keep on thinking that unless we understand that climate change is a whole of society problem, it is not just, again, in the IPCC reports, this is what we said, that we can't be thinking of sitting in housing or sitting in transport or certain agriculture, water, thinking of it sectorally. Yes, impacts and modeling outputs show these sectoral impacts of climate change, but what is the solution set we have to offer? And it's really transitioning entire systems. So how do cities and infrastructure systems transition away from both bad development, haphazard urbanization, but also then transition away to climate resilience, building adaptive infrastructure, for example, all those kinds of things. So this, first of all, this idea of it's a whole of society thing, and the experience of climate change, as you very nicely put, is an everyday experience. So this, we cannot think of climate change only in terms of iconic disasters. A big cyclone is, yes, a very important part of the story, but there's a build-up. And in our work in another project called Recovery with Dignity, we were really trying to unpack this a bit. And what we found is that, yes, the disaster happens, but what happens in the moment after the disaster, and then in the years after disasters. So in this project, and maybe actually we should share that around, we were really capturing narratives of recovery and trying to understand how the idea of disaster recovery is constructed by Indian policy, both at the national and state level. And there you've got this move from recovery being very post-disaster, we have to do something, to this whole global discourse that India latched onto with good reason of recovery as build back better. And build back better in its idea is build. And the build is usually a house. And a house is usually away from a coast. So this pushing of people away from the coast, building houses and relocating people, often over a decade post-tsunami, which is of course not a climatic event, but still that huge disaster, even 10 years after the tsunami, when we were doing this field work and trying to gather stories, there was resistance to move into these houses that people were being relocated into. So ideas of recovery from the top are around buildings. And you understand that. The logics are around, it should be tangible, it should be countable, and ADB should be able to produce a report where 1,000 houses were given to 1,000 people. And that idea of counting, and therefore the state is performing, both the state and these other actors are performing. We also then charted narratives of recovery from what we call the middle, which is scientists, NGOs, humanitarian aid agencies, which came and spoke about recovery as it has to be gendered. You have to understand that you can't be giving these big fishing boats to certain castes which don't even fish. So this kind of story, they nuanced the narrative of recovery a bit more. But then when we charted stories of recovery from the front line, people who actually experienced Cyclone Gaja, the range of cyclones that happened in those years, what we find is recovery, we had these really rich group discussions where we would actually take clippings of the media and lay them out as, this is what people are saying about your village. This is the kind of narrative that's there. What do you think about it? Does this depict your sense of both loss and recovery, or can we, move this narrative? And again, people spoke, of course, about houses. Please build our school. The school coming back and functioning is an idea of recovery and all of that. But also the temple in the village, can that also be built? Our roof has gone. The temple was the place we got together where women collected and did some work. Can our old coconut grove come back? So the idea of recovery as more related to nature, an idea of recovery that is more relational, that is not only giving a house. So I think that project, and that's what, I mean, we came up with a graphic novel because we weren't able, I mean, we wrote our papers, but they were so incomplete in capturing these stories, and we came up with a graphic novel called Afterwards, which Nihal, who's sitting there very quietly, actually authored and pulled together. And we also translated it into Odia, Malayalam, and Tamil, because these were the 3 coastal states we were working in. It's available online, open access. So I think, to me, and that is just a story, we were looking at cyclones and coastal flooding in that project, but to me, this idea of the words we hold, the words we use, and if we just step back and see where are those narratives coming from, is critical. And in climate change and migration, it is even more critical, because there are, as both of you were saying, there are some larger forces that either don't want to talk about these things. So there's an invisibilizing of migrants. The fact that we don't have an estimate of internal migrants in the country today is by choice. And so there's an invisibilizing of certain types of data. Like, we are never going to not have numbers on GDP growth in India. Why? But we don't have a number of the number of people who are working away from home. So there's an invisibilizing, and then there is, in some cases, knowingly or unknowingly, misuse of words. And here, I think that's the role of people who use those words in their day-to-day job, like us. Like, so what do we mean by climate hazards and risks? When is it a climate-induced disaster versus just another kind of disaster? Not to use the term natural disasters, because all disasters are socially constructed. They may be a natural hazard, but they are when they turn into a disaster when they interact with social and infrastructural systems. So that is the care I think we have to bring with when we're talking about climate change. Your other question, I guess, on is migration always an adaptation strategy? I would say yes and no. If I was to put on my researcher hat, what is adaptation? I define adaptation as reducing risk to climate change. Climate change adaptation is that. But in its more commonsensical way, adaptation is a change in the way we do things to sort of reduce whatever risk we think is a risk. And then if you want to really look at the word, adaptation it comes from evolutionary biology, and the idea of, like, we adapt to, like humans have adapted, but different animals adapt to their surroundings and so on. So is it a climate change adaptation strategy? What are the indicators for that? Most commonly, researchers have used metrics. Economists especially have said, X migrant travels to X place and earns more. Then that person remits XYZ amount and therefore is doing better. This is deeply reducing the experience of migration, the outcomes of migration. Yes, remittances and financial remittances are one part of the story, but what is happening to social networks, communal networks? So many women migrants I've spoken to, like over the past 10 years actually, talk of course, having more money in the city, but also then having more care work in the city, more fear about where their children are, more a complete lack and erosion of social ties. So many women from Kolar and Karnataka, I remember, have spoken about just not being able to sit under their tamarind tree in the afternoon when all the household chores are done and just chit-chat. That is no longer possible in the city because you don't know your neighbors, you don't have your tamarind tree. Work hours have become much longer. And so this, what are the other impacts or outcomes of migration on how people are living, how people are negotiating lives in destination areas, whether rural or urban, needs to be looked at. And then just a final thing, I think when we talk about climate change and migration together, there are some severe blind spots that are there. One is, of course, just the nature of work in these, wherever these destination sites are, whether it's brick kilns in Uttar Pradesh or it is garment factory floors in a Tamil Nadu. I think also examining sites, not only looking at climate impacts and how people are dealing with risk in their sites of where they live, which is what a lot of reportage comes out on, people in informal settlements in Bangalore who are migrants are facing flooding. Yes, that is true. We also are contributing to that evidence in the project. But what is happening on the factory floors? There's a lot of evidence now. Garment factories are sites that trap heat what is happening in construction sites, those sites where vector-borne diseases are increasing. What are the kinds of data, and also how are we challenging some of these work providers? Like, what are the real estate folks doing? There are, for example, advisories on people not working from 12 to 4 during extreme heat when there's a heat wave, announced. But some of our initial interviews in Kochi showed us that actually then you just move to indoor work, which is fine. Migrants want that. They don't want to lose those 4 hours of work. But can there be better ways that we think about rest, providing safe workspaces, all of that? So there's a lot to be done on the solutions side. I keep on saying this, the way we live and work in a climate changed world is going to be very different from the way we live and work today. And again, there are some people who will be able to cool their spaces, who will be able to protect themselves in high-rise communities, and there's some people who are not going to be able to do that. So we have to, as a society, then have, or at least question this model of inequality that we are just, all of us, and that's what the climate crisis is going to embed, that inequality more and more. And that really is what we have to think about. I've veered very far away from your questions, but...
Yeah, that's right. And I think that's an important point, because climate change really deepens existing inequalities. So those who are poor are going to get poorer because they're going to be impacted by climate change that much more. And our policy is silent on many of these aspects and many of these things.
Just one thing to add maybe on that, and that is what I think all of us have to get better at, maybe definitely researchers have to get better at, is to also then tell these stories in the language of policy, which means that when you, a country like India, various states also in India are repeatedly publishing and wanting to showcase themselves as doing well on all the SDGs. What the IPCC report clearly shows is that you're not going to meet your SDGs if you don't meet your climate targets. You're going to have more poverty, you're going to have more water insecurity, more gender inequality, less sustainable cities. These are all the SDGs. So it is that translation of what does this mean? Like, if you talk about migration and climate change, SDG 11 on sustainable cities, SDG 13 on climate change, SDG 9 on reduced inequality. You're not going to meet any of those. And if you want to show yourselves as doing well on these SDGs as a country or as a state, you better be dealing with the climate crisis. Yeah.
Thank you so much, all of you. We can have some open-ended questions for anyone who wants to take them amongst you. But Jagdish, I'm looking at you. So Chandni spoke about some of the blind spots in maybe policy, climate migration. Does science have blind spots in terms of what we know, what we don't know, and how that could impact us?
I think some of you may have heard of Raghu Murtugade, who's also a climate scientist. And he has been emphasizing that we need to have information and knowledge that is which is at scale, and the type of information, the type of knowledge which is very important that comes from IPCC reports we have to do the rest of us have to actually generate knowledge, actionable knowledge, and evidence and solutions at a local and regional scale. And I think that's one area where I think the scientific community and others really need to move forward on. Because I think that, like for example, early warning system, how do you design an early warning system to give the people 20 minutes, 1 hour warning, 2 hour warning to get out of harm's way? Things like that. So much of technological advancement has been made. We also have AI now, so we need to take advantage of some of this to be able to solve some of the problems at a local scale. And I think that is one area where I think we haven't done enough, for sure. The other thing is that the overall narrative, in terms of it's amazing how literature and even cinema is ahead of the rest of us in terms of bringing it to our attention. I just want to mention a few examples. I mean, of course, everybody knows about Amitav Ghosh's work, but that's quite recent. But if you look at one of the earliest movies that ever, a Bollywood movie called Kartavya, was the first movie in the mid-70s which actually talked about ecosystem services. Yes, and that's the opening. That's the opening of the film, and it's got all Dharmendra, Rekha, and all that. So it's all of smugglers and criminals and all. But it starts with that. Sagar, which was covered the conflict between I think trawlers and other traditional fisher folk, right? Ram Teri Ganga Maili was actually during the Ganga Action Plan. It was about the poor state of the Ganga. That's what inspired it. I mean, the rest of the film is a different matter, but it was. So, and other literature. So I see some hope that this, apart from the fantastic work done by our journalists, I think that we will soon may hopefully see things coming out in movies and short films that are also popular, that will capture the complexity and the urgency of climate and other environmental change and the impact it has on all of us.
And of course, their impact will be much more louder. Yeah. We'll open the questions, the room for any questions from the audience. Anyone who wants to ask question can, yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. Already Kavita has thanked Ketaki for bringing in that gender nuance. But this is another round of thanks for you to bring that up, because forget about, and then how Kavita addressed that based on her reflections and interactions with workers in Udaipur and various other parts of the country. My observation and experience thus far has been, and the narrative that Pradhan has been consciously trying to build, is that it is not about just recognizing themselves as workers, or failing to do that rather. Think about what happens to the farmers. Starting, it's very, very interesting to me at least. My daughter, who happens to be in class 3 now, when she was in preschool and pre-primary, I asked her, and I saw she was still doing the online classes because COVID was still around. And people, like the teachers, used to teach them occupations, occupations and professions. So whenever invariably a farmer or a doctor would come in the scene, it would be a man. The nurse would be a woman. The laborer would be a woman. But the farmer is a man. And that is absolutely the case when you go to rural areas and you talk to women. Now coming to migration, the men folk are gone. First one to go. First one to leave their roots, leaving behind the women to do the entire thing. Household, farm, everything. And even if the men folk are there, the women are doing 80% or more than 80% of the farm work. Whatever we get to eat on our plate is because of the tedious and back-breaking labor that a woman puts out there in the farm. Men do very, very specialized, very, very minimum job on the farm. It's basically the woman who does. But who is the farmer? The man is the farmer. It's a very risky thing. It's a risky territory I'm going into. It's a very, very political matter. Because now when it comes to inheritance or the land, the ownership, who is the owner? Who is the farmer? It's always the man and not the woman. And this fabric is so, so long and it's so deep rooted. It has not happened over a period of time, or it needs to be looked at slightly different from just climate-induced migration, I would say. That is but thank you for bringing that up. The second one, which is a question, this was an observation. The question is, what did you get to see, or what did India rather? That's more riskier question. Taking that risk consciously. What did India learn at all, if it has learned, from the reverse migration during COVID? If you have got anything to say on that.
Yeah, thank you for saying a lot of things that were also in a lot of our minds earlier. So one of my personal grouses with the whole migration discourse has been similar to what we have with climate, wherein the conversation is extremely technocratic and at times very masculine also. So my question is specifically to Chandni and then also to Kavita. There are a lot of nuances, like you said, you spoke about everyday changes, right? And when we say migration, the imagery that we see in the media or in the mainstream narrative discourse is of bodies moving from one place to the other, mostly for livelihoods. But the lives part of it, you know, how we work very extensively with women in Odisha. So how a woman's plate has changed, how has her nutrition changed because of climate-induced distress? The place where she's staying, very little of it is actually, she has not physically migrated, but her entire lived experience around where she is right now is very different from what she grew up in. So how are these nuances? There is research, there are some stories that are coming out, but they are still in the alternate space. How do we mainstream them? Just last week, I was in a conversation on heat, and I was thinking about the kind of images that will talk about heat in a more nuanced manner, because every time we can't show laborers sweating when we are talking about heat as images in the media, right? So how do we make these alternate narratives mainstream? It may be a long journey, but if you guys can share some experiences. Yeah.
Okay. Hi, I come from Kochi, so obviously I'll talk about the coast and the Western Ghats. So there is a missing tribe in this whole climate change that I kind of track it very, very seriously, is the fisher woman, the women in the fisher folk families. That is, they were the backstream, they were the back end, the big walls who manage the homes and the entire households when the men go fishing. That's how it was. But now what has happened is, since the sea has taken away all the beach spaces, the coastal spaces, they are actually forced to, go out for jobs. So there is a huge imbalance in the house management of their children, their household, and their own income. Earlier, they used to dry the fishes in their own open spaces. Those spaces are gone. Now there is the machine work has taken over all the drying part of it. The back end works. Once the fishermen come back with their catches, then there are a lot of work the women contribute. They also vend it out. So now the mobility has come in, so people are taking out their bikes and they go off. So the men have taken over. The catches have come down in the seas. So the number of fishermen going to sea itself has come down. So they have taken over a lot of economical contributions which the women otherwise were getting. They would manage that. So that there's a poverty happening there, a silent poverty. Now what is happening is, these women are now going and far off, like 5-6 kilometers away from home, and they go and set up shops where they sell chili powder or some other powder, that kind of thing. So their work, which was very much related to their, the sea and the coast and the fish, that's where so that is gone now. One is because the catches have come down. The kind of fish that is coming in these things are not something that they know. So the fish that's coming into the dining table is itself changed. So they don't know how to cook that fish. So then they have left so there is a whole amalgamation of, identity. There's a crisis going on, which I spent a lot of time. I don't know about. I want to contradict that statement that we are not doing mainstream reporting, but we do. In Times of India, Kochi and Kerala, we are doing it. We are doing big time, and we do deep stories, and we go on to the field. I'm somebody who's been last 10 years, and 2018 onwards, it's changed completely. That's a different thing. But this is one aspect which gender in fisheries now. Across Asia, there's a lot of discussion happening. But in India, there is no. First of all, there is no fisher woman in the economic. They are not there. They are a silent, strong force, but they are not there in our register. It is only the fisherman. He gets the subsidies. All the contribution is mostly balanced. Once he goes off multi-day for 10, 12 days he's away. The entire household and the economics is managed by this woman who runs the whole thing. She's the, and that is acknowledged by the fishermen. There is no doubt about it. But that is a social connection. But the fact is that they are not there. There is no policy. There is no gender policy which actually accounts for this population. I would say in Kerala we have about 10 lakh fisher folk families, but I don't think there are women who are actually in that register who are getting that subsidy directly.
You know, I absolutely agree. That was a generic statement when I said it's not there in the mainstream media.
No, I didn't mean specifically. I'm just telling you.
We've also
we
done
do
a media
lot
review.
of no, and I will agree with about this migration. You know, we are getting peacocks in Alapura. From Rajasthan, the peacocks have come to Alapura. That's the entire down the stream. And then the foxes have gone from our backyards. Homesteads don't have foxes. When the fox is gone, the peacock is here. And that's affecting the fields. People have not started killing the peacocks yet, but they have started killing the wild pigs, and that's another story altogether. But the migration is happening. Another aspect of this ecological migration is that Holi is the time when all the migrants go home. Holi, Diwali, these are the two seasons. Holi they go, and they come back after the fishing trawl ban, because many of them are working. They work in the construction sector, and then they go fishing. These are two main areas which they take. And you know, when they go home, we go to the railway stations to see them off too, because that's a story there. You know, they take a lot of coconut saplings, banana saplings, and they take those to their homes in Odisha and Bengal and all. Typical similar climate, tropical climates. So there's a movement there also. There's an ecological change happening. So these bananas from Kerala are now probably going to be, grown in.
That's lovely.
They start. You know how they start? That's very interesting.
Can we just take the last question, because we are really running behind the schedule.
Okay, I'll try and be quick. So I just wanted to pivot a little bit from what Chandni was talking about, adaptation, and also back to an extreme events, to policies which are actually causing climate change, and I want to pivot to forests. So I cover forests in particular, and Adivasis and displacement, and we are seeing again and again the government is coming up with, whether it's a river linking project or whether it's a renewable energy project in open grasslands, or it is a pump storage project in Shahabad, which are causing, in turn, causing the Adivasis who live in those forests, because we're drowning 60 square kilometers in Panna, for example, to have to move out, that displacement which is happening. And along with what Chandni was saying about gender, and Kavita has been saying about gender, there is also a nutritional loss for Adivasis, which again comes back to the inequality in their access to good food, which they were, you can buy an apple in Kuno today for 30 rupees, but Adivasis who lived in the forests of Kuno, and 16,000 of them who were evicted for lions, which never came, and now cheetahs, cannot afford to go back into the forest and, get fruit. Now they have to buy an apple. So while we look at events, as Kavita mentioned very clearly, we're looking at events, for example, the cheetahs coming to Kuno, right? The great Indian bustard dying in Rajasthan, or a new project in somewhere. We are not connecting the dots enough to say how that in turn is going to cause climate damage, because the IIT has come out with a paper which says that how, linking of rivers, for example, or draining of water bodies is going to increase heat in that area, and how there again that is going to cause migration, displacement. And where do these displacees go? They come to the bottom of the labor chain. When they come to the city, they will be the migrant who will be carrying the sand. They will not even be the mason, right? And their children, in turn, somebody spoke about, the silent invisible majority is the children of migrants, who in turn will loss of language, loss of schooling, and back at 12, they'll be back in the labor chain. Yeah? So I wanted to ask about the policies that academics like yourselves are advocating for any changes in forests, because We know that forests are supposed to be 21%, but we also know that the Indian State of Forest Reports has shifted its goalposts and now includes plantations as forests. Very difficult to say. Yeah.
I just have one question Sorry, I have a question for you, Jagdish. You talked about the Himalayas and this tourism. Now, the reporting was fantastic on the Kedarnath disaster and all that, but people still keep going back every year, despite. So, what is it that, as journalists, editors, what are we doing wrong? So, the reporting is great, and it's in mainstream, but nobody seems to listen. So, would you any research as to why that's happening? Because we can only put out the information the best we can. But is it that nobody's listening, or is it that we're doing it wrong? And I'm specifically focusing now on the Himalayas, tourism, all these, villages.
Yeah, so I'm sorry, I don't know your name. Suparno, hi. I wouldn't hazard a guess about whether India has learned everything from the reverse migration that happened during the pandemic. That's something I'm working on as a long-term project. But I don't think that there's one India learning, and I don't think there can be one India learning about anything. I don't think there is even one India story about anything. So I would not try to go down that road. But however, what I would say is that what the migrants everywhere I'm meeting, those who have come into the cities and who have gone back and who are back in the cities now, what they have been telling me, and this is something that I say this with some sense of responsibility, I have spoken to enough of them to say so, their trust in, their faith in the cities has been shattered. And they don't see this as karma bhumi anymore. So many of them who felt that karma bhumi was something that they respected and that they venerate, that they had great reverence for, they do not anymore. The cities threw them to the mercies of the pandemic, and they come back because they are forced to, but they do not respect the cities anymore. And I think that personally, I think that has great. That is instructive for us in understanding rising urban apathy. And this is another problem that we will continue to face, right? That not just the ultra-rich who are living with air filters in the homes and who do not step out into a mucky road ever. Not just them, but everyone else is also increasingly, the middle classes increasingly are apathetic about loss of the loss of the commons in the urban areas. So I think that this is related to the fact that a lot of middle class migrants, a lot of lower class migrants, working class migrants who are who built the city do not respect it anymore. That's one thing that I want to say. The question of mainstream, I don't think that the newspapers are the mainstream anymore. I'm sorry, but that's not where the good journalism is happening. All the people we are talking about right now, the migrants, they don't understand what we are discussing here. Nothing I have written in any newspaper can be read by them. And anything that I write, Preeti is here from Pari, and anything that I write for Pari is read by people in 12 languages, at least, instantly, 15, instantly. One of the most recent stories I did was from Nagarhole, which is where I'm coming back from actually yesterday, about a group of 52 villagers who were ousted from the Nagarhole Tiger Reserve when it became a tiger reserve. They have gone back in and they've occupied their land because they want to be back in their village. And it's now today's the 94th day that they've been there. No electricity, no water supply, obviously. So but they want to continue to hold that land, and there's a legal battle going on, etc. I'm sorry, I lost the track of what I was thinking. The mainstream media covered them also. That story that I did was in English, and it had to be translated by a group of activists for those 52 families. The 52 families sat down, and somebody sat there and translated 3,000 words for them from English to. The migrants don't read English. The English newspapers are not the mainstream. I'm sorry.
So just to, continue on the thread that Kavita just was on, I think there's a lot of good regional journalism. So for example, in Uttarakhand, I think journalists like Shekhar Pathak and all writers have been writing for a long time. And I think there's not enough I think some of us don't know enough about that. And we need to connect with the journalists who write in Marathi, Hindi, Tamil, Malayalam. And I think Kerala, of course, may have lots, but there are other parts of the world, other parts of the country where I think that the scientists and other folks are not well connected with local and regional journalists. I think that's an opportunity that needs to be seized at the earliest, because they have grounded information, they can go to the local MLA, they know the local context, and you bring in some other dimension, the biophysical, the natural, combine that with local knowledge and insights. I think that will raise the level of the discourse, I think, at local and regional levels. That's one thing. On the question related to forests and communities, as we know, when the Forest Rights Act came, there was a lot of polarized response to that from conservationists and folks who were looking at forests as also places where people live, have livelihoods. And so there was two types of in some sense, conservation discourse happening. And I hope that because of some progress made, I mean, there's still some parts of the country where clearing of forests, even now, in anticipation of relief under the Forest Rights Act. But when you compare that wherever at scale which is happening, it pales into insignificance compared to the amount of forest that has been diverted for big projects and so on, right? So the scale at which, when you do this comparison, maybe, yes, any forest being illegally diverted after I mean, it's a bad thing, and we need to find some ways and means of countering that, but also to keep in mind where the biggest losses are happening. And I think the connection between forests as a source with people in terms of livelihood and dependence, I think that the looking at the community forest rights under the Forest Rights Act as an instrument of conservation, and maybe even things like carbon credits, that has not yet reached the policy in it. So there is whatever advances have happened is because of communities themselves, in some sense, mobilizing with the help of some civil society folks, NGOs, but it has not yet translated into something at the I would say policy level. So I think this conservation, and because land of all kinds is now, a lot of competition is there. All your open natural ecosystems are the places where people want solar farms, they want windmills, and so this is something that is going to continue. Forests are increasingly, because of the linkage between tourism and wildlife, for hotspots of wildlife. I think that is also, in many places, actually generates a lot of income for local folks, and other people have actually moved to these places like Kanhar and Ranthambore and other places because there is economic opportunity. So there's all sorts of dimensions to the migration. Displacement is one, on one hand, like from Kono and other protected areas, but also people flocking to some of these places, some of them middle class and upper middle class, and even other lower middle class folks coming to seek opportunities in that tourism, wildlife tourism is providing. So these are things that the connection between forest rights, conservation, and emerging climate hazards, that I think needs a little. It's very complex, and I think there's a lot of polarization, in this, and that is going to come into play when we are trying to write about it. And I think that's something that I think we really need to spend more time and effort on. So that was, and what else was there on Himalayas? Yes. Yes. So that again, I think that I don't know whether people like us writing from here is really going to make much of a difference. I think that people who have skin in the game there whether it's the local MLA who's accountable, also the other bureaucrats, I think, and the people who are being impacted. I think that some of them may have agency, some don't, but I think that is where the response will. Yeah.
They have agency, right? They're actually buying tickets to go to a place where they probably die in a landslide.
Can I offer
Sure.
one point here? So people who also have skin in the game are influencers on social media, and they are also the ones who are promoting a lot of these destinations. You will increasingly see people, influencers with cameras and a backdrop of a waterfall, right? And we've had reports of influencers who sort of died in a freak accident because they were shooting videos, and the people who had agency had already warned them that don't go there. This happened in Maharashtra, in Pune, I believe, outskirts of Pune, right? Families who've been clicking photos, and like you said, they have agency. So I also feel that apart from journalists who are all here, I think there's another ingredient in the mix, which is social media influencers, right? And I feel that these influencers also need to be trained in ways, brought in these conversations, so that they can also see the consequence of their videos. We all love to watch reels, right? You go to Shillong, you have to stop at Cherrapunji and get a photo out there in front of the waterfall. But then the waterfall changes levels around the monsoons, and of course now Meghalaya has dried up. But then what do? I want to take a photo, there's that itch that you want to scratch. And the influencers come in there and they kind of prod you to scratch that itch. But can we scratch that itch in a more informed way? So I think, exactly. So we really have a responsibility, and we've tried, in fact, in journalism, we've tried working with influencers. Also, we've done a lot of these workshops also. The point that we keep going back to is spending half an hour every day or even in a week reading about what is 1.5 degrees. and even in journalism, we've come to that largely when we've done workshops. At the end of the workshop, people come up and ask, what is 1.5? So I think we need to really get back to the roots of good learning. Whether you're an influencer in English or in other languages, whether you're a journalist, and despite you being a veteran journalist, we still have to keep on updating our knowledge. So I think what Kavita was saying resonates quite well with what our experiences have been, is that we really need to go back to asking the hard questions, the good questions, and that's where Jagdish and Chandni actually come in, because what we've figured out is, at least the journalism that I do and my tribe does, there are synergies in the way that you do your science. You're also asking the questions. Your reviewers are asking you the tough questions. Therefore, you're able to publish. A lot of the times, you're not able to get out a publication because the reviewers are asking you certain questions, and you need to go back and revise your paper, your data sets. So similarly, in journalism, we also have that mindset, and I think we need to go back to that mindset a bit more, as Kavita was clearly saying. And we've also become content farms, right? Which is adding to the problem. Like you said, fantastic reporting is coming from Uttarakhand, Ridesh Joshi and others, right? But then again, there are content farms also, which are just disseminating information. That's it, information. So as reporters, yeah. So I feel like, yeah. So what Jagdish mentioned is bring in the people who have skin in the game to, I think, inform these, I would say, audiences in a way which is probably they are going to pay attention to. Rather,
I have a different point. I'm sorry to sound like a bit of a cynic here, but having reported from the ground on development projects of the government, and also in Uttarakhand, why is it there's no civil servant talking to you about what the building or the plans are in Uttarakhand? Why is it that when I ask questions in Panna of 60 square kilometers of core forest reserve is being drowned. What is the forest department going to do about it? Nobody wants to come on record. I'm sitting in the forest office. I'm talking to the forest. He says, madam, I will have to check. Madam, I will have to check. Every question is, I will have to check, which means I'm not getting an answer. Similarly, why are renewable energy lines running above ground, killing birds in the bird corridor, as you rightly mentioned? Nobody is talking. You can send thousands of emails, you can sit in the DC's office for days, they will not talk to you because they are so scared of their political position, of being transferred out. So when we are talking about asking questions, as Kavita and you are saying, we are not able to ask questions of people in power. And if journalism cannot talk, if cannot get truth out of people in power, sorry to mangle that phrase, then I don't understand how we are just talking in the air. Because nobody in power is talking to us, nobody is explaining, they are not seeing themselves as accountable.
But that's also because genuine knowledge is missing.
You mean a forest service officer who tells me that, madam, hum plantation karenge, and I look at him and I say, sir, plantation karenge aur forest ko dubayenge, usme kya, can you compare the two? And he says, madam, that is the policy. And he's right, that is the policy.
It's missing at the policy level, it
Yeah.
is not there. There is no way they look at the whole picture and make decisions.
Absolutely, yeah.
So let's close this panel discussion and we will move on with launching of our reporting guide. So
Yes. Thank you. This was really fantastic, and I think this is the kind of conversations that we need to have more often. I think that's what makes all of our work more richer, grounded, and rooted in realities. Thank you, Chandni, Kavita, Jagdish, and Ketki for this wonderful session. We have two publications as part of the CLAPS project that we are so proud of launching today. May I please request Jagdish to release the two publications and maybe share a few words.
Maybe I'll say a few words just about this shifting grounds, telling the climate migration story in India. This particular thing is what started off as a media review, and Nehal and Sophie will present that right after tea, which was we were just looking at the kinds of things being reported around climate change and migration, and felt that it is not always focusing on or using the kind of evidence that we at least see in our day-to-day work. So this was really just a way to synthesize some of the evidence and lay out some of the myths that we see in climate change and migration reporting. Hopefully it's a useful starting point, I would say, and there are lots of other resources also there in this. The second one, if you want to... The second one, and Aditi and Swati are the lead authors of this piece. They're sitting quietly in the background. Can you at least just, yeah. It's called Internal Migration and Climate Resilience in India, and it assesses current policies and interventions in the country. It sort of starts, getting to this question that we were, or starting to answer bits of the question that we were talking about in the end, which is that our current development and climate policies in the country truly acknowledging and then doing something around supporting internal migration and climate resilience in the country. So there'll be a few slides giving a bit more on what this report says. And with that, we can, back to you.
And I would like to thank a few people in the room whose insights also played a great part in shaping the reporting guide. Kavita, Chiranjeevi, Sahana, Preeti, and Aishwarya. They generously shared their time, experience, and insights with us, without which I think it wouldn't have been so stronger and evidence-based. So thank you so much.